Hello, this is our second meeting of Harmony's Men's Group. Tonight we'll be talking about does God exist? You'll recall last time we spoke about what is truth. We spoke about objective truth and subjective truth. But tonight we want to talk about does God exist? And we started with truth in order to figure out what is truth actually makes sense. So tonight we want to start with the universe. There are different ways to get at the problem or the issue of whether God exists or not. As a Christian, I'm going to cheat a little bit up front. Normally, we leave this to the end, but I'm going to assume certain things and then we'll go into science and see what science has to say about all this. I think that the Bible speaks clearly about who God is and that ultimately we all know that there is a God. We may not like the answer, but we know that he exists. We have in the Bible the first opening sentence of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Uh, the Hebrews did not have a word for universe. And so this is what they thought of the universe. They didn't know about the beginning of time and any of these other things. What they knew is what they saw and what they experienced. And so this is from a first person point of view. The Bible is not trying to teach science or botany or food, cooking or anything like that. It's simply giving the accounts of people as they lived it out and as they experienced life. We have another well-known passage from the Bible in the book of Psalms. The Psalms is very popular. In Psalm chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge." As we look out into the stars, we look out into through the trees and out into the skies, whether in the morning or at night, we have to ponder sometime, how did this get here? Where are we? Where do we fit out there in the universe? If we don't ask these questions, we're sort of wasting time, I think, because there are temporary things that we could be thinking about that won't do anything for us. But if there is a God and there is eternity and he created us for a purpose and with us in mind, then wouldn't you want to know? I want to know. I think these are important questions in life. The book of Romans, this is in the New Testament, in chapter 1, verses 19 and 20 says the following: "For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse." If this is true, and we're cheating a little bit here because we're going with what the Christians believe first, before we get into the science of this. But if this is true, then, and if the Bible's reliable, and we'll be talking about that in one of the meetings coming up. If we can trust the Bible, then what it's telling us is that God has implanted in us, just like in our DNA, his signature and the curiosity to seek him, to look for him, that somehow we know. We may not have all the answers, we may not have all the details, but that we have enough to search and to look. And that's what we want to do. We don't want to just leave it where it is. So before we begin, I want to propose two definitions of God that have been proposed elsewhere. I like both of these definitions. You can come up with a number of them, but I think either of these encompasses who God is. The first one is from St. Anselm, way back, hundreds of years ago. He said, this is how he defined God. God is the greatest conceivable being beyond which none can be conceived. Or better said, clearer said, God is the greatest possible being beyond which none is possible. So whatever you might conjure up in your mind and think, well, for God to be God, He would have to be all powerful and great and good. Why good? Because it is better to be good. It is morally perfect to be good than to be evil. And so God would be perfect in every way. And he would have to be timeless and a bunch of other characters that we're going to, or characteristics that we're about to speak to in a moment. Another definition for God is the following: God is a maximally great being, beginningless, eternal, uncaused. That's important for what we're talking about tonight. Necessary, personal. That's also key. All powerful, all knowing, good and perfect, and on, omnipresent, and so forth. So, as we think about who God is, and in our minds we say, well, if God is all powerful, if he is this great being, then he would have to be the ultimate. Because if there would be one greater than him, then this one would not be God, that one would be God. So as we go further back, we say, well, what is the greatest conceivable being, the greatest possible being? One who is eternal, timeless, powerful, personal. He would have to be personal. We'll see that in a little bit, and on and on. So these are the questions we want to be focused on and have a sort of running definition in our minds. So is there evidence for God's existence? Last time we spoke about beliefs, certain beliefs that we may have. And we spoke about two beliefs, but three that sort of seal the deal. The first one is we all have false beliefs. Now, who wants to think that? I don't want to think I have false beliefs, but we have false beliefs about things. Perhaps something that someone told you about somebody. You may not think about it, or you may not know about it. Perhaps someone gave you some bad information about someone or about something, and you believe it. The reason is false is because you believe it. But you don't know it, right? I don't know it. I'm in ignorance. Maybe it's not that important. There are certain things that are important that I would want to know. And then we have true beliefs. Beliefs that are more than 50-50. And these kind of true beliefs, we know them essentially by luck. We could be right. God exists. I say God exists. 51-49. I say it's more than that. I say it's high up in the 90s. I don't know what else could be out there but God. We always have to reserve to say 100%, right? Because we are fallible creatures. So do I believe there's a God? Yes, absolutely. And I live that way. So this true belief that I have, I based it on certain evidences. So it's not just true belief. It's the next one. Evidential or forensic beliefs. And these are true beliefs, the same thing, except evidential beliefs means I have evidences for. I've looked into it, and I can somewhat defend it, which I will be doing tonight. And this is what I would be encouraging you to do the same, not just for whether God exists, but whether Jesus was raised from the dead. Because if Jesus was raised from the dead, then Christianity is true. And if Christianity is true, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to believe it? So it's not enough to say that we're honest. There are a lot of people that say they're honest and they just want to know the truth. We're going to see tonight that that's not always the case. But we must always have the courage to follow the evidence wherever it leads. If we're honest, we have to do so. That is a very hard thing to do, by the way. We can use experiential reason, and this one I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'll just put it here. Normally you leave that at the end. In other words, personal experience. I think the Bible, just like I read in Romans 1:19 and 20, that tells us that we know that God exists. We know that a God is out there, a great being. We don't have all the details, right? We may not have all of it unless we look into it. But somehow we know, and this is called a priori. This means without anyone telling me anything. This is basic to me, to every human creature. Somehow we know that he's out there. And we believe that God puts a certain curiosity in us, in our minds and in our hearts, a certain impatience to want to know. Now, we could ignore it and we could fight it, but it takes more effort to do that than just to look into it. The more we look into his existence and who he is, we learn to love him and obey him. Why? Because he is perfectly good and moral. And I know at this point, someone might be thinking, well, what about suffering and evil? Well, that's the topic we'll take up next time in our next meeting. This is usually the biggest topic, the biggest sticking point for not believing in God. But if you think about it, this really shouldn't stop you from thinking and looking to see whether a God exists. And thirdly, we can use, and this is what we're doing tonight, we can use inference to the best explanation, or in other words, what makes sense based on the evidence. Historians do this, scholars use this, detectives use this, investigators use this. So as you have a courts system use this, when you have so much evidence, you don't have to be perfect, but you're looking for what is reasonable based on the information you have. And so this is what we want to look into. So what kind of things can we look at for evidences? I already mentioned the personal experience, but I can't transfer that to somebody else. You don't have my experience, but I'm convinced that my personal experience with the Lord is sufficient. Why? Because the Holy Spirit, which you don't have to believe, but the Bible tells us in my experience, God himself through his Holy Spirit guides me in certain ways. And this really can't be explained because it's a spiritual thing, but nor am I trying to get you to take my word for it. You need to look into it for yourself. So what kind of things can we look at? Tonight we'll look at the first two, the cosmological argument. In other words, cosmology has to do, the cosmos has to do with the world, the universe, the origin of the universe. And then we'll look at the fine-tuning argument that has to do with this fancy word teleology, has to do with purpose. What is the purpose of the universe? Does it have purpose? In the coming meetings, we'll be talking about the moral argument and evil and suffering. As I said, those are included. And intelligence, we'll speak about a little bit of that tonight. Consciousness has to do with, we are a duality, right? We're a body-soul composite. How do you know? Well, material things, science tells us that material things don't think about anything, right? Think of a rock. It doesn't have any dreams, doesn't have any thoughts. We are all matter. And we are all predetermined, according to science, to think a certain way if we believe science in that way. So if we're just matter, if we're just physical, right? Physical entities, then we're just driven to do whatever we do. But that's really not the case, because we have thoughts, and we have thoughts about our thoughts. We have introspection, that is, we look within. We have dreams. We can see ourselves. We can understand ourselves. We can think about NDEs or near-death experiences that people have. You don't have to believe it, but it suffices to say that if you can have a thought about those things or an experience in that sense, that has nothing to do with your brain or your physical being. So there are many things like this. There are mathematics. What is math? Those are numbers. Where are they? Are they physical? Where are they? They're abstracts, right? By definition. What is love? It's an abstract. It's not concrete. So we know that not only matter exists, but immaterial things, things that are matterless exist. And this gives us a clue to take us a step further. There's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We'll talk about that in a future meeting. So has the greatest miracle already occurred? Christians say, yes, the greatest miracle is that God created the universe out of nothing by his own power. But this is cheating. I'm speaking as a Christian now. Here I have Carl Sagan, as you see on your screen. And he was famous, if you recall him. He had a number of shows on PBS, and he was an astronomer, an astrophysicist. He had a bunch of titles, won the Pulitzer Prize for this and that. And this is what he says. The cosmos, he will come into your screen and say, the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. And he was so confident that that was the case. He was also confident about some of his speculations that we only needed a couple of things to have life. And he was wrong, dead wrong about that, as it turns out. So he sounded right, and he was a scientist and well respected. But he was wrong, even by his own colleagues. He was wrong. Let's take a look a little further. What we're talking about tonight is the universe. Science tells us that approximately 13.7, 13.8 billion years ago, there was this Big Bang. And this is where space, time, energy, and matter came into place. So you can think about that as METS or STEM. Typically, energy and matter are put together. So space, time, and matter. There was a great compaction of heat and great energy, even within the first fractions of a second. Call it T0. And a lot happened here. And over the hundreds of and millions of years, it's been expanding, and we have been expanding. And for the most part, science tells us, cosmologists and astrophysicists, that we have maybe another 6 or 7 billion years. So make plans. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at this great system that we have. Science tells us it's a closed system, and it's called the natural system, the material system, and that's all there is. This is all science can tell us. When you look at all the hundreds of billions of galaxies, hundreds of billions of galaxies, and we barely get out of ours. You can't even see Earth from the other side of our own galaxy. It's not even a blip. Just tells you the vastness of it. This is another. These are images from Wikipedia and out there online that tells us something about the shape of the universe and how it's traveling and how it's dissipating energy and all these other things. And science continues to look into these things. Cosmologists do, astrophysicists do, astronomers. And we do the same. And so that's what we're looking at. So can science disprove God? A lot of scientists seem to think so. Here, a famous, well-noted mathematician, John Lennox from Oxford, says this. He says, given the Ford Model T, the car, right, the vehicle, and Henry Ford, right, is designer, what accounts for the Ford Model T? Henry Ford or the laws of internal combustion? So he's making an equation whether there's a God as opposed and with the laws of nature. Did the car invent itself, or do you need the designer, Henry Ford? A car mechanic can learn everything about the car, but he has to know that it did not create itself. So you need both. You need Henry Ford, right, to create the car, and you need the laws of internal combustion to allow the car to work. Sounds reasonable. Sounds reasonable. You would think, until we get to issues of the universe and we get other arguments. So here's our first argument, and we're not going to get into the details on how I have a bunch of references, links, video links that you can look into. The first one is called the Kalam cosmological argument, and principally Christians use this argument, but it's a sound argument, and it's a valid argument as you look at it. It has 3 parts, and it's quite easy. It says, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore, the universe has a cause. Notice I've italicized the word begin, because that's important. So I'll read that one more time. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. So if the first 2 premises, number 1, number 2, is true, then the universe has a cause. If whatever begins does have a cause, for instance, we don't know of anything in nature that doesn't have a cause. Somebody that knows something about science might bring in the quantum vacuum, quantum mechanics, but even scientists can't settle their hearts on that. We'll bring that up in a moment. If whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist. That's a statement. We'll see that that is the case. Therefore, 3, the universe has a cause. So the Big Bang, this was, oddly enough, the Big Bang was a form of derision. I believe it was Fred Hoyle that came up with that name, because he believed in an eternal universe. not in God or anything like that. And as he was doing his calculations, and others were, he had to stop in his tracks. And he said, wait a minute, it does go back to a certain point. And he just called it the Big Bang. Not very professional, but that's not what he wanted to do. He wasn't too happy with it, and it stuck. That's how we got that name. The Christians would say that this is Genesis 1:1. That's why I read that initially. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So most astronomers believe the universe began in a huge explosion approximately 13.8 billion years ago. In 2003, over the decades, this is important to know because this is settled science now. This is what I'm going to bring up. In 2003, these three gentlemen, Bohr, Guth, and Vilenkin, these are cosmologists, physicists. Many have been working over for decades on this issue, and they had answers, but they finally settled it in 2003. And what they came up with was this quote: all the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. It's been peer-reviewed, it's been hashed and rehashed for years and years, and it's settled. This is what we can actually say is settled science now, which is really rare. A lot of times they say that it's not settled at all, but this is settled science. The universe had a beginning. I won't read. You can read the paragraph there for yourself on the slides after I'm done. You'll see the slides. Why is this important? Because before this, there were several other models. The oscillating model, the steady state. There was another one, and what they had was trying to figure out how the universe came to be. But none of those models worked. And this was going on for decades. And it's settled now that there is a beginning to the universe. Now, having tried all these models, the only one that's left, which is not left at all, is the multiverse. Perhaps you've heard of it. This has to do with a number. There's an inflation model earlier when I was missing. The universe is popping up out of nothing, just like they say this one probably popped up out of nothing. And so eventually this one would have come up. But it doesn't work, even in their own theorem. And even one of the authors, Alexander Vilenkin, says it doesn't work. By the way, he's an agnostic, so he doesn't believe in God. And he also holds to the multiverse theory, but even he himself says it doesn't work. No matter what you come up with, the universe had a beginning. It had an actual stopping point at the beginning, prior to the beginning. We use the word prior, that really has to do with time, but we got to cheat. Otherwise, we got to use the French word sans, N-A-N-S, to say without, So when I say prior, I understand that I don't mean time before that. But somebody might bring up, I brought up the quantum vacuum, the quantum theory, but even they say that doesn't work. So that's also included in the model. So whatever models come up, and many have been tried for decades, the universe had a beginning. As of 2003, it's been confirmed. It was confirmed before that, but finally put to rest. So here you have, I have a snapshot here of Albert Einstein. He's the one that came up with the general relativity and special relativity, very famous. Here you see his quote: "I now see the necessity of a beginning." Before this, he said that the greatest regret he had was trying to fudge the numbers, because he assumed that the universe was eternal. And so in his calculations, he made up a number, a constant, to make it work. But once he was asked to go over to the Hubble telescope and take a look, and he saw what he saw, this is what he said: "I now see that the necessity of a beginning." He understood that there's a beginning. Another one, Robert Jastrow, a famous astronomer, says, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the..." So he's making a mockery now instead of religious faith. "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." In other words, this is what we've been saying all along, that there is a God. But let's continue. Science affirms that the universe had a beginning. This is from 2003, the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, the BGV. It also affirms the following: that space, matter, and time were created, began at the Big Bang. This is important to note, right? Space, matter, and time began at the Big Bang. So, since nothing begins, this is how we started, right? Anything that begins to exist has a cause. Since nothing begins to exist out of nothing, right? We don't have pink elephants popping in and out of being out of nowhere. We conclude that what created the universe must have been an uncaused, because the universe was caused. So whatever caused the universe had to be uncaused. Beginningless. Why? Because the universe began. Timeless. Why? Because the universe created time. Time came in with the universe. Prior to that, there was no time. So it had to be timeless. Had to be changeless. This has to do with change in the natural law. Spaceless. Why? Because we have space, and space was created at the Big Bang. Immaterial. Why? Because matter, right? Things you touch, things that maybe you can't touch, but for instance, gravity and so forth, all these things came to be at the Big Bang. So whatever came prior to it has to be immaterial, right? Think of a soul or a spirit, something like that. Had to be enormously powerful by definition, and a personal creator of the universe. Now, this is where a lot of times people jump ship. Why does it have to be personal? Because only minds can make decisions. The universe, any science will tell you this, doesn't think for itself. It just does things. One thing moves another. It's like a domino effect. You need intentionality. You need intellect. You need a conscious mind. You need a decision maker. You need free will to make a decision and to have the power then to carry it out. This is the things we need to think about. This is what the Bible teaches, and this is all without the Bible. This is just using science and say, okay, what is the inference to the best explanation? If space, matter, and time began, then at the Big Bang, then what came before it, which we're cheating, we can't use the word before, sans, without it, just prior to it, had to have been spaceless, immaterial, timeless, and all the rest. Paul, in the Bible, if you ever read the Bible, and some of you have, some perhaps haven't, in the book of Acts, this is in the New Testament, chapter 17 from verses 22 to 31 says the following. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, Mars Hill, in Athens, Greece, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. So far, we've looked at the cosmological argument. In the video links at the end, you can look further. There's a lot more information on this, as you can imagine. There's a lot of written works on this as well. But I think this is enough to pique your interest and to take a look and to think about what we have. Next, we want to take a look at the fine-tuning argument. This has to do with the precision with which the universe, and particularly the earth, and the origin of life can come to be. and how delicate it is. The fine-tuning argument essentially has three parts. It's either required, that is, by physical necessity, it's there because it's there. It doesn't make any sense. Why would it be there? Why would it be necessary? If it was necessary, it would be eternal, but we know it's not eternal. It began. And if it began, then it's contingent, meaning it's based on something else or someone else. By pure chance alone, well, we see by some of these numbers that there's no way it could be by pure chance alone. This is what some astrophysicists, those that deal with the universe and planets and math and so forth, used to try to put up, but it doesn't work anymore. It hasn't worked in a long time. In fact, many don't even try that anymore. That it just popped out of nowhere. But we know that's not the case. Or three is a product of intelligent design. And even without using the Bible, just thinking about some of the things that we're talking about, I think it leads you to the inference of this same result. Inference to the best explanation that an intelligent mind has designed the universe. So I have one example here, the fine-tuning argument. So the universe has all these constants and these quantities, all this math. It's a lot of math. We're told that the universe has 10 to the 79th power, some crazy number, subatomic particles in the universe. Gravity, so gravity is the thing that has me sitting down in my seat right now. If it weren't for gravity, I wouldn't be sitting down. Neither would you. We'd all be floating around, or there goes your cell phone. There goes your baby, up to the skies. So science tells us that if gravity, this is what physicists, astrophysicists say, cosmologists, if gravity was off by 1 and 10 to the 60th power, the universe would not permit life. So what does the number look like? You see that number there. It's 1 followed by 60 zeros, whatever that is. We don't have anything like that. We don't even know what that is. We would have no life, no stars, no planets, no chemistry. So we need some comparisons, right? The human body has 10 to the 14th power of cells. Still, that's a huge number. Gravity has much more than that. The precision that it needs. The number of seconds that have ticked by since the beginning of the universe is 10 to the 20th power, right? 13.8 billion years, 10 to the 20th power seconds. So here's an example. And there's a good example in one of the videos, I think it's the first video at the end of the slides. Similar to rolling a number 6 on your dice, one dice, on a single dice 76 times in a row. What are the odds to roll that dice 76 times in a row to roll a 6? This is the equivalent to 1 part in 10 to the 60th power. The reason this is important, this isn't just for games. What we're told by gravity, that if gravity was off by 1 in this huge, crazy number, by 1 part, right, an incy-bincy part, that we would not have life at all. That's how much precision is required. And this is only for gravity. There are dozens of these constants that have to be exact by a fraction. So the last bullet point, the astronomical odds of this happening 76 times in a row, rolling a 6, would be greater than 100 trillion plus 100 trillion plus 100 trillion plus 100 trillion plus, well, you see there, it keeps going. It's virtually impossible. And if you would see somebody ever do that, you would know it's a loaded dice, right? So, or you would be dreaming or something such as that. Or just believing whatever somebody told you when you were drunk or high. It's virtually impossible to be living where we are living unless it was guided perfectly. These numbers are crazy numbers. There's no room for error. So Christians are mocked and said to have blind faith. Well, scientists also have blind faith. By the way, the Christian, when we speak of faith, many misrepresent it. Faith for the Christian means trust, confidence, believing loyalty. based on evidence, which is what we look into, not just a hope and a dream and a warming in the bosom. A famous, and I mentioned him earlier, the famous atheist astronomer Fred Hoyle, Nobel Prize winner, said a common sense interpretation, this is how we came up with the phrase Big Bang, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. So why don't some people believe? I want atheism to be true. And so here's a quote from another famous scholar, Thomas Nagel. I believe he teaches at NYU. I want atheism to, this is his quote, I want atheism to be true. He's an atheist. And am uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't believe in God and naturally hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. So is he a truth seeker or not? How can he make these claims and these statements if he's a truth seeker? Doesn't he want to know? He doesn't want to know that there's a God. He doesn't, that's the answer. He does not want there to be a God for whatever reason. He just wants to be able to do what he wants to do. He wants to do discoveries without the help of the Creator himself, as if he has something to do with it. Is that reasonable? So what's the verdict? What can we conclude so far? There's a lot we could say, but you'll have to do some homework, or we can discuss it further some other time. So what's the verdict? Only an eternal, timeless, beginningless, personal, all good, all-powerful being could create the universe and maintain it. It's not just to create it, but to maintain it, because of the second law of thermodynamics and a number of other things. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 45, verse 18, it says the following: For thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it. He established it. He did not create it empty. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is no other. In other words, God created the universe, created the world, created earth, and humanity, Adam and Eve, and all the rest of us, for a purpose, for a reason. And these are the reasons that we're looking into going forward. Here are some of the resources that you can look into. These are all videos. Some of these are well-explained videos. There's many more, but I think you'll find them interesting, and I hope you take a look. Next time, February 8th, we'll be looking at why evil and suffering, which is the biggest topic, the biggest issue that people have really with not believing in God or not wanting a God. Whether Christians or not Christians, this is the biggest issue. Why is there evil and suffering? Why doesn't God, if he does exist, do something about it? So I hope to see you then. And please take a look at the slides and do some evidential work for yourself. God bless you.